You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. We want to thank you for joining us today as we have another very special guest to present to you in our series of interviews that we are doing with some of the most interesting people in these particular areas. With me, as always today, is my co-host and friend. He is
Victor Vigiani, and on the other side of the mic, that's Chris Iverson. Good to be here with you, Chris. Looking forward to this.
This is going to be another one. These interviews have been coming quick and fast and enjoyable. We hope we are presenting to our listeners out there that is growing. We are at almost 500 subscribers now. We've had over 10,000 views, which is wonderful for something that is new. And of course, we are trying to do something a little bit different. We are trying to present a perspective that we don't think anybody else really is doing. We are not so much about the lights in the skies and things that have happened in the past, but we're trying to focus on their meaning and perspective going forward. Why are these things happening? What is really going on? Where is this going to be leading us? And these, we believe, are the important questions and thoughts we have that are important to us in the field of ufology and exopolitics.
Yeah, you're right, Chris, because any of the researchers that I speak with, and I speak with quite a few on a regular basis, most of them, if not all of the really in-depth people who are committed to this issue are involved in that kind of perspective, looking forward and trying to figure out what this is going to mean to humanity once this thing called disclosure or acknowledgement, whatever you want to call it. Once that happens, what's the planet going to be like? What's our relationship to whoever the visitors are? And also, what are the relationships going to be among all of us as human beings, our governance, our military, and all of those things that will definitely be a factor and be altered by the acknowledgement that we are, in fact, not alone. And today's guest, I think, can really bring us forward with respect to discussing that issue. And so with that, you know what, I'm going to read his bio and we'll get moving. Nick Pope worked for the UK Ministry of Defence for 21 years in a number of different roles. From 1991 to 1994, he was posted to a division where his duties included investigating UFO sightings. He's now recognized as one of the world's leading experts on UFOs and the unexplained. Having taken early retirement from the Ministry of Defence in 2006, Nick now works as a journalist and broadcaster, contributing to a wide range of TV news programs, chat shows, and documentaries. He's also acted as a consultant and spokesperson on various alien-themed movies and TV shows. Nick has written 3 non-fiction books on UFOs, 2 science fiction novels, and a thriller. He now lives in the United States. Nick Pope, welcome to the New Frontier Network. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that you and I have talked many, many times before, and we've sat and had a few bubblies together in some of the conferences that we've been at together, and reflecting on all of this. I would just like to ask you, looking back for a second, what's been the evolution of your understanding of this issue compared to when you first got involved in this back in 91, and how your perspectives on all of this have really changed over that huge amount of time? How have things changed and evolved for you in your understanding of this issue?
Well, when I first came across this issue, I was simply posted into that particular section, and I had no prior interest in this topic, no strong beliefs either way. So I came in with an open mind, sure, but really not knowing much about the subject. So I guess I was broadly, I suppose, on the skeptical side, but really not knowing what I would find. And then as I went on in that job, going back through the archive of files, going back decades, and investigating the newly reported cases. Gradually, my views evolved, and I found out, for example, I was surprised to learn that how many of the witnesses, for example, were police officers, military personnel, pilots, radar operators. And that inevitably changed my views and made me, I had a sort of wait a minute moment where it was like, no, these aren't crazy people. These aren't conspiracy theorists. These are ordinary people in extraordinary situations, and some of them excellent witnesses, and sometimes with, for example, radar, or where we have forward-looking infrared films, corroborated by very good physical evidence. So inevitably, I think my journey was one of discovery and evolution, and ending up in a place really where I think now this is one of the most interesting and important issues that we're facing in terms of, if it turns out to be true, the societal impact would be so immense that I think it's crazy not to be looking at this. Why wouldn't we want to look at this?
Yeah, exactly. Before we get at the meat of the whole program, I'm going to ask Chris Iverson, my co-host, to introduce our panel to you, because they are at the starting line of this, and I know they're chomping at the bit to throw several questions at you. So, Chris, why don't you introduce our international panel to Nick, and then I think we'll go with Francesco first, I believe.
Absolutely. We have three of the finest panelists and correspondents internationally that money can buy, which, since we pay them nothing, it's amazing that they're here with us today. So we have with us from Portugal, Francisco Mirao Correa. We have from Peru and Miami, Giorgio Piacenza. And last and certainly not least is the wonderful and beautiful Chrissy Newton from Canada, joining us from the Toronto area with Victor. So we're grateful to have them here with us today. They're all geared up and ready to pepper you with questions and pick your mind. It is, as you indicated, something that in your work at the MOD, where you start off as a clerk and you've got information coming to you, documents, data, pictures, material, interviews, and it has to get you to start to wonder what's going on and why this is happening. The evolution, as you mentioned, is very important and something we'll get into a little bit more. But first, let's start off with Francisco. And we'll go with Francisco's questions for you, and that'll get the ball rolling.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Nick, for being here with us. And I wanted to ask you about the myths that surrounds you throughout the years. You have been, many have doubted about your credentials regarding your functions in the UK's MOD, and I would like you to give you the opportunity eventually to talk directly to those skeptics and a few researchers that put in question what in fact you did at the MOD. And another question is, did you left any open doors inside the MOD? Do you still have contacts inside? Is there some kind of flow of information still?
Yes. On the first question, it won't surprise you to learn that, having investigated UFOs for the government, I'm going to be the villain to some people in the particularly the conspiracy community, not so much the UFO community. And yes, there is a lot of fairly crazy stuff written about me on the net, in the blogosphere. Some people claim that I'm still secretly working for the Ministry of Defense. Other people say that I never worked there at all. Fortunately, all this crazy talk can and it's only a couple of people, by the way. It's just as with most things on the internet, couple of people sort of talking very loud and very often and trying to whip people up into a frenzy. Fortunately, it's all nonsense, and it's all easily proved on the official website of British Parliament, where there is a question asked years ago to the Secretary of State for Defense, asking what I did between 1991 and 1994. And it says, it's there, as I say, it's there in black and white on the official website of the UK's Parliament, and it says Nick Pope investigated UFOs. So it's a complete non-issue. And also, of course, many case files relating to my work. The British government has declassified and released about 60,000 pages of documents over the last 10 or 11 years, many of which I wrote. So it's all out there for people to see. As to, I mean, I suppose I can't prove that I'm not secretly still working for them, but you can't really prove a negative. And yes, I have some open doors. Of course, you can't work in an organization for 21 years without having a number of friends there. So I still talk to people there almost every day, mostly on social media, of course. But I'm still, just to give you one final little example, I'm still in one of the most long-standing Ministry of Defense fantasy football teams. So there we go.
Well,
Yeah,
that right there proves it, that you still
Sure.
are deeply involved with the British government. And, and I could see somebody saying, oh, that's how they funnel money to you for the work that you do, is because nobody could constantly win the fantasy football league year after year after year like you have. I mean, it's been an incredible run that you've had. And obviously that has paid for your home here in the United States. So it's your streak of luck is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So no, I get it and understand it, and we all see it, and we all have heard it from others. It's unfortunate. I think this the field of ufology and exopolitics has been one of the worst in terms of eating their own, so to speak. I think there's definitely jealousies that happen. There's misquotes. There's legends that grow through no fault of the person being discussed. And it's hard to control what other people say about you. So it's to be commended for you to come on here and discuss it. And we're glad and happy that you did. As to your current contacts, more along the lines of information that could potentially be going on. And I'll jump in here with a little bit of a question, since it falls right along in those lines. Boris Johnson just announced recently a very highly funded budget item regarding the British space program. With the contacts that you have still within there, what are you hearing about that? Why the sudden large increase in interest and obviously funding for the British program, and where do you see that going?
Well, the expansion of this particular sector of defense business has, I know, caused quite a few pieces of speculation in the UFO community, and it's exactly the same sort of speculation we saw when former President Trump announced the Space Force. And a lot of people are asking themselves why, and does this have anything to do with UFOs? My answer is that it doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with UFOs. It is simply that in military terms, it's generally acknowledged that there are 5 battle spaces. The 3 conventional ones are land, sea, and air, and the 2 other ones are cyberspace and outer space. And there is a growing recognition in government, the military, and the intelligence community that space and cyberspace will be the two critical battle spaces in any future war. And of course, the best way, hopefully, to avert any war in the first place is to so dominate those battle spaces that no potential adversary would seek a fight. And so I think you don't need UFOs in this case. There are very, very good military reasons for wanting to expand the UK, and the US are doing it too, of course, the whole sphere of space. And of course, one hears a lot about anti-satellite weapons. If an enemy, whether it's another country or whether it's a non-state actor, could suddenly destroy or disable our satellites, basically take down our entire communications system, command, control, communications, we would be blind. And so those are really the reasons that the British government's expanding that. Although I should say, for those of you who like your science fiction movies, I should point out that the British network of communication satellites hooked into all the military comm systems is called Skynet. So maybe that's, with the Terminator movies in mind, not such a good omen. But there you are, not necessarily anything to do with UFOs, just that it's going to be a critical battle space.
Yeah, with that international perspective, Nick, I know we've often talked about how other countries are dealing with this globally. I know Chrissy has a question regarding the political kind of perspective in a global sense about this whole issue. Chrissy?
Yeah, Nick. Hi, nice to meet you. My question is made about like the G7 summits and the summits in general. The UK is part of that G7 summit. We never really hear about them talking about the UAP subject, just in general, of anything that comes out from the summits. Has there been conversations about it? And have you been part of those conversations, or you've heard anything? And what has it been? And has there also been any backroom conversations that we haven't been privy to yet? And kind of what is that narrative that's going on in those discussions?
I'm not sure whether discussions have been held formally at G7. In fact, no, I'll take that further. No formal discussions have been carried out, but in terms of backroom conversations, just things that come up in the margin, I would be surprised if it hasn't arisen. And the reason I say that, and now I've not been privy to those discussions, but I am aware from a number of sources that certainly in bilateral discussions between, for example, the United States Defense Secretary and his opposite numbers, that this question has been raised. And it's been raised in the context, everyone has chosen their words very carefully. So sometimes people will talk about unidentified drones, and there will be speculation, are we dealing with Russia? Is it China? Or is it something else? And sometimes people will go a little further and talk about unidentified aerial phenomena. Generally, they don't put this into the minutes of any of these discussions, but the Japanese government last year did put it into the official record. When US Defense Secretary Esper met his Japanese opposite number, the Japanese issued a formal communique and said that the discussions had included the mystery objects that have been seen, for example, around US Navy ships. What was interesting was that the United States, when they issued their own summary of that same meeting, they did not mention that at all. And I asked the public affairs people in the Pentagon why this was, and that was, they answer some of my questions, but that was one they chose not to answer, which is always an interesting sign in itself. So it's come up, it's come up, but it hasn't found its way into any of the or much. The Japanese kind of broke ranks, but generally speaking, it doesn't come up into any of the G7 communiques or any of the bilaterals. But it's there. It's there.
Interesting. I want to follow up then with just one more question around the threat narrative. Like, I find it really interesting that the States has, especially the government, has a threat narrative going on around UAPs. Is that conversation in the UK the same? Because there obviously there's a Space Force now that, Boris put 22 million in, is that conversation similar and parallel to the States? And if so, why do you think that? And do you agree with the threat narrative?
It is broadly similar, and it's the flippant answer is the reason the threat narrative is used is you won't get any of the senior political figures to take any notice of this unless you start talking about a threat. I mean, if you start simply talking about this in terms of it being an interesting mystery or a scientific problem, they won't be interested. But the moment you use the word threat, people sit up and pay attention and are more likely to give you funding for it. And so therefore, it's no accident that ATIP is called Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So it's the way to get the politicians to pay attention to it. But also, there is an equation that defines threat, and threat is defined as capability times intent. Our data on UAP suggests that capability is pretty impressive. We don't really have any reliable data on intent. Therefore, you can't solve the equation. And if you can't really say definitively if there's a threat or not, the default position in government is assume there's a threat and then be relieved if it doesn't materialize. That's better than assuming there's no threat and then getting caught with your pants down if one suddenly emerges.
Excellent
that makes
point.
sense.
Yeah.
But doesn't that
Absolutely.
cause some issue though with the general public? Because then if the public's hearing this, you start to create some form of chaos along with then people being scared because they hear the word threat when they don't understand that the word is used in a government term. They don't really understand that. All they hear is we should be worried, we should be scared. And doesn't that create, some kind of scary feeling for them, for the general public that's consuming this information?
It does, yes, you're absolutely right. But I think there's no way out of it, because the advantages for people in government getting senior people to engage on this outweigh those other questions of public perception. And if I was a military intelligence officer briefing up the chain of command, I would say, I need to get my bosses to take this seriously and put some resources into it. And if the price that you have to pay is that people get a bit worried about this, that frankly, I will take that hit. And I know it sounds callous and cynical, but I won't be that concerned about it, because I think it's the price worth paying. But I know full well a lot of people get very upset with those of us in government. But in government and in the business community more generally, people should just remind themselves that everyone always sees everything in terms of threats, but also opportunities. So I don't know if somebody's going to build a new road through a suburb, somebody is saying, what are the threats? What are the opportunities? It's just the way government think about everything. But yeah, it's a problem. I do appreciate that. And I know that it's been very, very unpopular with people who take a more new age and spiritual view of the phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely something that I think is out there, and you have to look at it from both sides of that coin. I don't think that there is any one size fits all answer out there for any of this. And everything from the less prosaic, that if one identifies something that's going on as a threat, obviously it's also a way to obtain funding. And government agencies and departments and so forth live off of the funding that they receive from the tax dollars. And you have to be able to be heard above the others. And one of the ways, of course, to do that would be to indicate that there is indeed a threat. There doesn't appear to be too much that's outstanding in terms of a threat. And most of the interface that is going on does appear to be benign, but I don't think that it removes the possibility of a threat narrative being there. And there's a reason that everybody's military is referred to as a defense, the Defense Department. It's there to defend the countries, it's there to defend the people, it's there to defend the world, not necessarily to go on an offensive. As a follow-up question to a little bit before that, Giorgio has a comment and question here for you.
Yes, thank you, Nick. I also work as a civilian advisor to Peruvian Air Force. And I know how people think about us being in cahoots with the CIA and stuff like that, that it's overstated. But anyhow, I recently came across an article by Spanish ufologist Jose Antonio Caravaca, who, using some research by investigative journalist David Clark, he found documents from the Secretariat Air Staff, in which it basically says that your tasks in this UFO research business was more like a clerical situation. And for many years, I thought that your duties also involved field research, interviews, evaluating photographs. So I would like to know what were exactly your duties and who conducted field research. That's one question. The second question is if there is any other research effort which is highly classified, perhaps on the level of unacknowledged special access projects in the UK.
The documents, I haven't seen this article. I have seen it referred to. I think it's based on a mixture of dishonesty from a British researcher and misunderstanding from the Spanish author that you mentioned. The document is apparently from 1979, which was years before I had even joined the Ministry of Defense. So things were done very differently when I was there. And as I have explained, on the website of the British Parliament, it explains the true position. And in the declassified case files that I wrote that have been released to the National Archives. So my actual duties were to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon, to determine whether there was evidence of any threat to the defense of the United Kingdom or something of more general scientific interest. Field investigations, there were very few of those over the years, even in 1979. Frankly, unless something had landed in a field, there was very little point in going to the location where a UFO was seen in the sky 2 weeks before. So the way in which the Ministry of Defense investigates UFOs is maybe different from the way in which civilian UFO groups do it. Civilian UFO groups may drive to the house of the witness and have coffee and biscuits and talk about it. In the Ministry of Defense, the way we do it is we just call up the military radar tapes. We look at space tracking, radar, satellites, with photos and videos. We use intelligence community imagery analysis, resources and capabilities. So government UFO research is fundamentally based on the resources and capabilities of the military air defense network. In terms of other programs that may exist even now, the public position of the Ministry of Defense is that their UFO program was terminated at the end of 2009. Now, I am in regular contact, as I mentioned earlier, with a number of friends and colleagues in the Ministry of Defense, but also a number of defense journalists for the mainstream media. And I think the way that I will say this carefully is that a number of well-placed sources have told me that people are still looking at this, but they are looking at it in the margins of things like intelligence programs, looking at next generation aerospace threats from drones, that sort of thing. So the British government has made no public statement yet about whether it is, for example, engaging with the United States government, the UAP task force set up in the Office of Naval Intelligence. There may or may not be liaison with the United Kingdom on that. They have not made a public statement yet. A number of people, I think, are trying to get them to do so, and some things are going on behind the scenes, but I can't really get into that until and unless any public announcements are made.
Yes, I get the impression that this document, that these authors like Nick Redfern, Philip Mantle, and David Clark, and are referring, and Kevin Randall in particular, are referring to this post the 1990s. I have a copy here. And I would refer you to this article called titled "Nick Pope Revisited" by Kevin Randall. So what would you say about that?
I'll take a look at it, but I think Kevin Randall, I'm afraid, and I did talk to him about this, has simply misunderstood the dishonesty of 2 or 3 British researchers. And as I can't make it any clearer than to say for the 3rd time, the truth about my investigative role on this, not clerical, investigative role, is written in black and white on the official website of the British Parliament. So anything else, I'm afraid, is dishonesty from 2 or 3 British researchers and misunderstanding from genuine researchers like Kevin Randall.
All right, I leave it at that. After all these years in ufology, do you personally think that we are being visited by non-human intelligences?
I don't know. And this is the ultimate irony. Those of us who've looked at this subject from within government, whether it's myself in the UK, whether it's the people with GEPAN in France, whether it's people like Lou Elizondo or Chris Mellon in the United States, those of us who've looked at it from inside government, we are not afraid to say we don't know. Whereas people in the UFO community, whether they are true believers or diehard debunkers, always seem to be so certain about what's going on. But those of us who've done this from within, we say we don't know. And Senator Marco Rubio, who was acting chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, said this the other day in an interview. He said, we don't know. Is it Russia? Is it China? Is it extraterrestrial? And I know this goes back slightly to the question about the threat narrative, but it's worth mentioning that Marco Rubio said, I would prefer that we are dealing with extraterrestrials, because if we are dealing with Russia or China, the technology is so disturbing that the United States would have been left standing. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm just saying what somebody with a very senior position in intelligence has said about this. So, but to go back to your question, I do not rule out the possibility that we have been visited, but neither can I prove it in any definitive way.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that you make, Giorgio, on behalf of Nick, and you answered the question quite well. There's so many incredibly difficult unknowns and non-sequiturs within this whole issue. Let's move forward a bit, if I could. The whole cascade of information that's come down since 2017 has really shaken the foundations of what the government purports that they might know and what the general public is being asked to understand about this. I know, Francesco, you've got a question regarding the new revelations that began in 2017.
Yeah, exactly. Since December 2017, there have been a cascade of news regarding UFOs. We have this report coming out from the UAP task force. Your personal opinion regarding this report? Will we see first? Will they comply with the date, and or will it be postponed indefinitely, the release of the report? And will we see something interesting in terms of some sort of revelation that there's indeed some kind of unknown intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon? Or will we continue with this sort of denial that we don't know what is behind this?
To clarify the requirement, which was first set out in the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, the requirement set by the Senate Intelligence Committee is for an unclassified report. But they go on to say that it may have a classified annex to it. So in terms of what the media and the public will see, it will only be the unclassified report, or maybe even not that, maybe even just a summary of what it says. And so in one sense, people should prepare themselves for a bit of a disappointment, because any of the really interesting material will be in this classified annex. And 2 or 3 senators who have already been briefed, when they were asked by journalists about this, not the report, but about the US Navy sightings and related issues, they came out of the briefing and said, yes, we have been briefed, but it is a classified briefing and I can't say anything. So that, I think, gives you an insight into how little the media and the public will find out about this. Now, the timescale for this report, which must come from the Director of National Intelligence, but consulting the Secretary of Defense, consulting the head of the FBI, consulting other agency heads as appropriate. It's due by around about June 25th. People like Christopher Mellon have suggested that it will be delayed. And I think they're almost hoping it will be delayed, because their view is that they couldn't possibly do a good enough job in the short time available, particularly if the biggest problem with this report is finding the right people. I mean, in the United States intelligence community, there are a whole bunch of different agencies. To find out which of them have active UFO programs, which of them have had historical programs which now exist in the archive, and the people doing this report must have the appropriate security clearances to access the individuals and the programs and the documentation involved. They must have the need to know. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And so it may well be that this report is delayed, even for want, as I say, of finding who should I be talking to. Somebody turns up at the door of the CIA and says, who do I need to go and talk to about this? That's the hardest question to answer, and it can take weeks and months.
It's been something that has evolved through the years, talking about the evolution, as you mentioned earlier. There's people that I know from inside the CIA going back to when they did have the Weird Desk, and everything seemed to go through the Weird Desk, and it was reviewed, analyzed, and reported through there. And now for the last it seems like 10 to 15 years, the US Navy seems to be taking somewhat of a leadership role, both in regards to what we've seen released through ATIP, and then even right up to today. So this will identify when we actually did this interview. Just notice came through here on the wire as we were conducting the interview that the video footage and photos that were leaked earlier this week from Jeremy Corbell through George Knapp, the Pentagon is now confirming that these are indeed photographs and video taken by US Navy personnel. So this might be something that does change this. And it's always been something, of course, in the world of politics, you can go back to Watergate or whatever, when you have somebody inside leaking information, it can change timelines, it can change deadlines, because if you're the responsible party within the government or the military for something like this, you try to stay ahead of what's going on. And if leaks are occurring, you have a responsibility to try to control that narrative by staying in front of it. And here we have, again, footage leaked to Jeremy Corbell for everybody to see of a pyramid-shaped UFO, blinking light. Heard some people say, well, blinking light means it's a, it's got to be of earthbound origins or a drone or something. However, it's an irregular blinking light. They failed to mention that. So the point being is that even though there is an attempt to control a narrative towards a release date, what are your thoughts regarding the leaking of information that could occur? And could that indeed speed up this process?
The leaking, and I think you're right to use that word. It is leaking. And it's not the first time, of course. We should never forget that in one sense, the three most famous Navy videos of all, the Tic Tac and Gimbal, Go Fast, FLIR, whatever names you use for but those three videos that came out end of 2017 and the third one beginning of 2018, they were leaked. And indeed now, while the Department of Defense, the US Department of Defense, subsequently did put them up on their website, they couldn't resist a little dig, because in the press release they sent out, they said previous unauthorized releases. And the word unauthorized is very important there. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here. As to why it's happening, I mean, look, what I think is going on is this. There is a sort of skeptic versus believer dogfight going on in the US military intelligence community on this. And the believer faction, if I can call it that, is making its move and has been making its move since the end of 2017. And these unauthorized releases, and it's not just the videos, from time to time it's some documents too. And they're just about staying on the right side of keeping it legal, but only just, I think. I mean, my understanding is that the Pentagon's position is, yes, this is genuine, but it's not classified, though there is classified information relating to this that has not yet been released. Mm-hmm. But this is what's going on, I think, is, as I say, a faction, a grouping, whatever you want to call it, within the government is making its move, trying to get this out there, trying to encourage other people in the system to move forward with this. And they are meeting resistance, as they have always met resistance. Now, part of that resistance is just the inertia of the bureaucratic system, but part of it is nearly 80 years of denial and all that comes with it. So there's a lot of politics going on here, and there's a real battle taking place, but most of it's taking place behind the scenes.
Yeah, I have a question to that too, because we look at the Black Vault that released that statement, and the statement was from Susan Go, who is the representative out of the DoD. She's a communications professional, and she says she remained to say if they were identifiable or used as training materials for unidentifiable objects or remain unknowns. The big thing that stuck out to me the most was the training materials for unidentifiable objects. That's interesting on its own. So the two questions here come out of that. We have, are they UAPs that are triangular UFOs, along with George Knapp's images that came out, the metallic blimp and the sphere, and then Jeremy's pyramids. Are these actually government intelligence, tracking, or their technology that they have, and this is just a red herring that the government is giving us? Or is it a tactic maybe with, we look at China or other intelligence? Like when you say that there's, unidentifiable objects that are for training material, that and it may be unknown, that makes me question then what they're confirming and what they're not confirming as red herrings or not to what we believe in the community.
Yes. I mean, the short answer is we don't know what we're dealing with. I mean, they are still unidentified. They could be something, they could be nothing. They're definitely official. I think the reference to training may also relate back to something that happened in 2019. And what happened in the spring of 2019 was that the DoD confirmed that they'd issued guidance to their own pilots, instructing them what to do if they encountered UAP. So that may tie in with the training reference. And they confirmed that they'd issued that guidance. They then declined to actually release what the guidance said, stating that that was still classified. But you raise one other really interesting possibility, I think, and this is absolutely the first time I've mentioned this publicly. I mentioned this skeptic versus believer struggle that's going on. These are some very smart people here who play pretty dirty. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't rule out the skeptical faction, or the faction that wants to maintain the status quo here, causing something to be leaked, which then a couple of weeks later will turn out to have a totally normal, conventional explanation. And the reason they would do that is give someone enough rope and they'll hang themselves. It's the idea that you'll trick them into talking this up, and then you'll hit them with you do know that this was just a tethered weather balloon or something. And then not only will they have egg on their face, but all the mainstream news media outlets who got all interested in this will feel that they were tricked. And then in the future, this is the critical point, in the future, they'll go, oh, no, not again. Last time, remember, we got caught out. We ran this UFO story, and it turned out to be, whatever, weather balloon or just something with the camera. We're not gonna touch this again. And so watch out for that.
Yeah, that's exactly where I feel that we don't know, or they, they're telling Jeremy Corbell this is real of his source, but it might not be, because we don't know where the leak has come from. So I think it's for us just to watch and see. And then when we do see that, I think it's not so much as Jer. Obviously, they have to, he has to fact check as much as possible, and that's what they're trying to do. But we have to be mindful, instead of looking at Jer and saying, "Oh, you should have known better." We need to look at the American government and say, "Well, what are you doing? And why are you putting out statements and confirming things to cause red herrings and disillusion within the community?" I think I'd rather go to them than to the investigator or the journalist personally.
Yeah, that brings up another point. I think Nick, try this out for size, and along the heels of what Christy's talking about, and how the governments coordinate themselves. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Five Eyes organization. UK, Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand. How are they sorting out all of the things that Chrissy just mentioned and all the things that we've been talking about in terms of leaks, who goes next, who's going to take the lead on this? Is there any other coordinated effort that's going on among the Five Eyes organizations that might add more of a context to what we're talking about?
Well, Christie and others mentioned the leaks or unauthorized release of material that have come out via Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and they've certainly been responsible for getting a lot of this into the public domain and getting a lot of this debate going. But let's not forget another fairly newly emergent media body, which is the Debrief.
Mhm.
So people like Tim McMillan involved in that. And just before Christmas, I think it was Tim McMillan at the Debrief ran a story where it was clear that there were a number of sources for his article, some former military intelligence officials, but at least one still in the system. And they said, in relation to your question about the Five Eyes, that there had been an interim report issued by the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force in Office of Naval Intelligence. And one or maybe two, I think, interim reports had gone on to various intelligence community servers involving the Five Eyes nations. And this had been almost put out there. The implication was to say, hey, people, we're working this up. We don't yet have our definitive conclusion. These are our interim findings. Does anyone have anything to contribute? Now, I don't know whether it was a specific question or whether it was just putting it out there, but certainly some material has gone to Five Eyes nations. And that's why I said earlier, in related to the United Kingdom, we are still waiting for any formal confirmation that there's going to be engagement with the UAP task force on any of this, whether the UK will have an input into report. What we do know is that ATIP and more recently the UAP task force are well aware of a number of things that we were doing at the Ministry of Defence. The declassified intelligence assessment called Project Condign. They were all aware of that. Rendlesham Forest, they were all aware of that. So it's just the question of how much of that is going to be formalized, and if so, what, if anything, the public will be told.
Right. I'd like to sort of throw it over to Francesco because he has a follow-up question, and we've got just about 10 minutes left with this, Nick. And then once Francesco has his shot, I'm going to give Giorgio maybe the last hit at it. So, Francesco?
Thank you, Victor. We now know that, for example, regarding the Skinwalker Ranch, that some people inside Congress or the Pentagon feared that the phenomena may be demonic. And you also referred in the past that some people inside the UK MOD also thought or relate the UFO phenomenon with something demonic. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Did it have any influence on the procedures with dealing UFOs from the past 70 years, for example?
They would never put anything like that into writing, but I knew that it was a factor with some people. And Lou Elizondo has confirmed exactly the same thing, that some of the pushback he got in the Pentagon was for that reason. All of this, or rather most of this, goes back to one tiny passage in the Bible, and it's in Ephesians book 2, chapter 2, I think. And it's a description of Satan, and it uses the phrase, the prince of the power of the air. And that one quote is what seems to have gotten a religious faction in government concerned that the phenomenon might be demonic, and therefore their view is we shouldn't engage with it because it feeds it, it gives it energy, and that's not what we should be doing. So yes, it's a factor for that reason, but they're very careful about putting that into words because they try to call themselves the skeptical faction, and yet their skepticism comes not from science but from religion.
Exactly.
Well,
Thank you.
you're scaring me, Nick.
Really, Nick? Yeah, yeah.
Giorgio, did you want to throw the last little bit before we tie things up?
Yes, thank you. Well, recently, the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, mentioned that something about UFOs in a positive way. Former CIA director John Brennan also mentioned that a friend had seen a UFO while on air piloting an airplane, I think. The current chief of naval operations, Admiral Michael Gilday, also recently mentioned that they failed to identify the 6 drones or so that were buzzing around the USS Kidd in 2019 near the Channel Islands, right? And so on and so forth. And now this triangular craft that Jeremy Corbell is showing, apparently unofficially filmed by a crew member, right, in the Navy. I know that the UK and the US, they have a close-knit relationship in military operations. So there should be some indication that the UK is also being buzzed by these objects. Would you say that they are going to also join forces with the US and begin releasing what they have also video or seen? Are there any indications of this?
There are some indications. I mean, absolutely. We have had these sorts of encounters too over the years. Some get reported, some still don't. But yes, my hope is that maybe through the Five Eyes or maybe just bilaterally, the US and the UK will talk to each other on this. I mean, I think it's fascinating. You mentioned John Ratcliffe, John Brennan, but also former director Woolsey came out in the last few days, James Woolsey, former CIA director. I just want to go back to that part of your question because that's I think, very, very important. Sometimes these senior retired figures are used to get out information or to at least get a debate going in a way that serving officials would not be able to do for political reasons. So very controversial, I know, in a completely different subject, but a former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, made a very provocative comment about the origin of COVID-19. Well, sometimes government can't come out and say things, but as a favor, they call in these retired people who then will do it as a favor, as I say, and get it out there. So when you've got Ratcliffe, Brennan, Woolsey, and others, that's important. And maybe someone like Sir Richard Dearlove in the UK will make a statement on this. I think it will take one senior figure, just one person needs to do it. Now, in olden days, it would have been Lord Hill Norton, I'm sure, but now he's dead. We are still looking for the first person, and I can't do it. It needs to be someone who had much, much more senior rank. I was just middle-ranking civil servant. It needs somebody with at least a couple of stars, if not more. But someone's got to do it, and I hope that they'll do it, and I hope they'll do it soon.
I get an inkling that it will happen.
The issue, we got to wrap up here, and I don't want to, but we've got to. When we interviewed Luis Elizondo about a month and a half ago, Nick, I asked him a question about if you had a box on a table and all these officials standing around it in the Pentagon saying, it's the disclosure box, okay? And what are we going to put in the box, or what are we going to leave out? Right now, I'm of the opinion that we should just throw everything in the box, close it up, and just throw it away, because you're scaring the hell out of me. It's extremely disturbing, with all of the biblical references that you're doing. And the reason I'm saying that is the general public is going to have a difficult enough time you sort of internalizing all this information, let alone having the government try to make sense of it to us. So with that, that's not a question, just a comment. And I want to thank you very much for being with us today. Do you have a final comment on that before we wrap things up, or what?
Well, at risk of scaring people even further, I should say, somebody mentioned Skinwalker. And of course, we should never forget that the UFO phenomenon is just one of many unexplained phenomena that have been seen there. And I don't know whether I should even say this, but I think whether it's by direct statement or by implication, it's clear to me that weaponization of some of these paranormal phenomena is at least something in the minds of some of the people associated with these programs.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah, I think, what you've done there is you've opened the door, not the Skinwalker door, but the door for you to come back, because we have to delve into this more. I know our listeners are going to be listening to this, say, I want more of this. So we're going to invite you back at some point, Nick, because you're a wealth of information, and you make us all smarter because of what your contribution really is. So before we leave you, is there any way that we can get some information from you, be it a website or whatever, regarding people who want to look at your work?
Sure. My website is nickpope.net. That has an unclassified summary of some of my government work on this. And that has links to my social media platforms that I use, mainly for breaking stories, Twitter, which is at nickpopemod. And I know that will start a few conspiracies, but no, it's just so that people can tell me apart from the other Nick Pope, who's goalkeeper in the England soccer team. So anyway, no, at Nick Pope MOD is my Twitter handle.
So Chris, over to you.
Sure. I want to thank you, Nick, and I want to thank our esteemed panel of correspondents for being here with us today and asking such thought-provoking and wonderful questions. Nick, I want to thank you for the openness and the answers for the questions that were brought to you, both personal, military intelligence, and the future. And we do indeed look forward to seeing you again. For those of you who are watching this, thank you for joining with us here today. Please feel free to leave a comment below. We enjoy reading your thoughts, your suggestions, and questions that you might have for interviewees that we've had, both past, present, and future. With that, also, if you like this, please hit that like button. Be sure to do that. And if you want to receive an automatic notification of upcoming interviews, please be sure to subscribe for our channel here at the New Frontier Network, where we explore those new frontiers in front of us. Thank you all. See you soon.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.